Welcome to the second day of the ITF Forum. ITF stands for Imagining the Future, and we're very happy today to organize 3 different sessions. We'll do 2 this morning and 1 in the afternoon. And the 2 sessions this morning will be dedicated to VFX. And we have the great pleasure of welcoming 6 VFX specialists from the UK and Germany. So for the first session this morning, we'll welcome Samir Ansari, who is a VFX specialist and worked for The Wandering Earth, the Chinese movie that was released earlier this year. But to start the morning, please welcome on stage Nicolas and Julia Strack from the visual effects studio Rise, based in Germany.
All right, hello everyone. We're here to talk about the visual effects of Dark. The second season, actually, which aired about 2 weeks ago on June 21st. And, well, I'm Nicolas visual effects supervisor on Dark. I've been working in visual effects for about 12 or 13 years now. Started off as a compositing artist, and for the last 2.5 years I've been with RiseFX.
Yes, and my name is Julia Strack. I'm the compositing supervisor on Dark Season 2, and I've been in the industry quite the same amount as Nicolas was, so almost for 13 years, mostly as a compositor in different companies. And I joined Rise after freelancing jobs last year permanently as a compositing supervisor. And just to tell you, like, short things, Rise Visual Effects Studios. So we are one of the biggest VFX studios in Central Europe, with facilities in Berlin, Munich, Stuttgart, and Cologne. Oh, and I have to take this. And we worked on several projects, also like Avengers Endgame, Shazam, Captain Marvel, obviously Dark Season 1 and 2, and many others. And if you want to have a look, just visit our website on risefx.com.
So we've prepared a little making of video today. Obviously, there's going to be spoilers, so I don't know if anyone hasn't seen Dark yet and doesn't want to be spoiled. Close your eyes, I guess.
If we could turn down the light, that would be awesome.
right. Hope you liked it. Some facts about Dark for anyone who doesn't know the show yet. The director is Baranbo Oda. It's a sci-fi and mystery show, and season 1 aired on December 1st, 2017. Everything was produced and shot in Germany, and it's actually up to date one of the most successful non-English, as well as I guess in general one of the most successful shows on Netflix right now. And as I already said, season 2 is available on Netflix since June 21st. The shooting went from June 2018 until November 2018, and then the post-production started in November and went until just recently, so until May. So it was about 1 year of production time, and we had 166 VFX shots. Let's talk a little bit more about the shooting. We had a total of 140 shooting days, and there were 49 VFX shooting days. Everything was shot in and around Berlin. And one special thing about Dark, I mean, obviously it's about time travel, and it's been playing in 6 different times. And what we've also done in order to represent the differences in between the times was we shot in different seasons. So that is about the same location in and around Berlin. And this was basically shot during summer, and this was shot during winter, just to represent the different times. So basically 2019 is supposed to be this beautiful world where everything is still okay. Everybody's just doing, like, following their normal days and everything. And then the future is basically the Armageddon. Everything's destroyed, and that we basically utilized the seasons for that. So here are some impressions from shooting. So this is an abandoned factory close to Berlin that we used as a set for the destroyed power plant. Some forest, and here we have the power plant basin. While it was still being built, there were 2 versions of it. So there was this thing, and then basically the art department had 2 weeks to destroy everything. And this is the iconic cave that everybody knows in Dark, and it's basically it's not even a cave that's also been built by the art department. Like, they just put a lid on top. Basically, there was this small kind of valley. And here we can see the wall, which we've obviously extended in VFX. I wanted to talk a little bit about set supervision. So what was really important, obviously, was the preparation and planning, since it saves time and money. So we met very early with the director, Bo, and we're talking about his vision for Dark and which elements he needs and so on to plan everything accordingly. When we shot, it was super important to capture as much relevant data as possible, obviously. Because sometimes during production things change, the script gets changed, you have to prepare a new VFX task which was not planned, and you can react so much better to it if you have as much data as possible. For that we used basic equipment like a DSLR camera and as well as a LiDAR scanner, which is this thing here. For this production we used it a lot, so I think we scanned every single set that we were shooting at just to have the data, and it turned out to be really helpful. So it creates basically scans like this one. This is it looks like a panorama image. It's actually a 3D model basically, which looks like this. So the way it works is you place the scanner in different locations around the set, so you can cover every angle. And then basically you get this 3D representation, which is super helpful for relighting or just as a spatial reference for where to place certain objects. Another thing that is, I guess, pretty standard is we used a gray ball and a mirror ball to capture the diffuse lighting, the reflections, as well as the color chart for color reference. And let's talk about the visual effects. So one of the many elements that you've just seen in the making of, and probably the most important element for this season, was the black matter. The goals on this were basically, we received a look dev from the director Bo, which was this thing here. So that was his original vision for the black matter. And what was really important for him was it needs to have two different states. So here was a little overview that we created together with him, just to focus our thoughts basically and understand exactly what he wanted. So these are basically the different states that the black matter has to be able to represent. The unstable black matter, which is supposed to be wild and organic, almost alive, and the stable form, which is supposed to be calm and mysterious, as well as the other forms that are related to the black matter, like the portal, the black dome, as well as this time travel effect that is created by the apparatus. So one real life reference for the material was this ferrofluid. It's basically a magnetic fluid, which is really organic and has these little tentacles. And one other reference was the sun. I mean, since it's basically, we wanted to find a way of representing this energy, this huge amount of energy that is stored inside the black matter, and why not use the biggest energy ball that we know of?
So then, after receiving all these references and talking to Bo about this, we started production, and our awesome FX supervisor, Corbinian Hoffner, got into creating the black matter. And to start off, obviously, we created some still frames, just to get a look and feel. How should the material be? Is it more reflective? Is it more diffuse? Do we use a light? What's the form? At some point, Bo suggested, when Jonas is standing in front of the black matter, it should act like, like an opening mouth. So that was the direction we were looking at here, and then we were playing around with some light that's inside the black matter. So what kind of color should it have? Is it more inside the black matter? Is it more like a light source? And that was like one of our earlier on concepts. Later in the process, they decided, okay, we really don't want to have a mouth because Jonas is going in there and no one really wants to get into the mouth of a kind of a monster. So we had like these two states. And we had then the raw black matter, which is one of the main elements because we see it quite often in the series. And this is built up of kind of two black matter elements. So we have the inner core, which is kind of, in the middle, like sphere-like, and then we have like an outer black matter which is kind of going wild, because the problem is you really don't want to see through the black matter, but you also want to have like this wild tentacle feeling. So that was our solution, to be a bit more flexible about it, so we could go really wild on the outside but still have like kind of a compact sphere. Additionally to that, we obviously put on some smoke and particle effects that were surrounded by the black matter, because that's what Bo was aiming for. The other thing is we wanted to have a light inside the black matter, and since the deadline, of course, is always like super short, we decided to put that step into compositing, because then we were way more flexible, have like lower render times, and are able to do more iterations in a really short amount of time. For that reason, we also rendered out deep images from the black matter, which means we not only have a 2D image, but also every pixel has a position data and a deep and a deep data. So in comp, we were still able to adjust the black matter a little bit. It's like, do we want to see more particles? Do we want to see less particles? So we can move them a bit around. And we also have the position data for the inner light, and can put that inside the black matter. Well, the other problem that arises is if you have an animated light and want to animate that in comp, you also need some light interaction inside your rooms. That's when the LiDAR scans came up quite handy. So this is an example of the Sigmundus laboratory. So we used the 3D model to do kind of a 2D relighting, to have light effects on the walls, to have some shadowing, that it really looks like the black matter is inside this room. The other thing is when the black matter is transitioning from its raw state to the stable state, we need to put some power into it, which is resembled by some lightning effects. And they shot some plates where they put lightning in, and we were having the issues. Okay, we have like actors in front of a green screen having some flashlight effect, and we have to rebuild this in CG as well without like having a pain in the ass and just trying to figure out where the light is coming from. And that's where Nico comes in again on set.
Yeah, so basically in the main plane we have all these little light sources on the Tesla coils that you can see here that were flashing to represent the lightnings that influence the black matter. And in order to recreate this lighting and be flexible with the frequency as well as the intensity of these lights, we basically did something that is super common in 3D. So, you know, you normally render light passes, and we basically just shot light passes on set. So we had this base lighting here, and then this is the light source on the left side for the left lightning. This is the one in the middle, as well as the one on the right, and all together we were able to recreate this image in order to, which really also helped with cleanup for the wall piece behind the green screen, for example. And by using all these elements, we were basically able to recreate the exact lightning frequency that we needed, so we don't get any inconsistencies in between the elements. All these elements, as well as the interactive light element that you can see on top that Julia was talking about, basically led to the final image, which is this one.
Another question that came up in the series, like, where is the black matter actually coming from? So, and the idea was that the black matter is stored inside these nuclear barrels that, you know, there was this happening at some time past. They put stuff in the barrels and no one really knew what was in there. And finally they open the barrels, and what they see is actually what we call a liquid black matter, because it's in a kind of a liquid state. And the art department also created some kind of this oily liquid, and they were filming it. So this was a great on-set reference. So what you see on the top image is actually what the crew filmed. And we had to digitally recreate this look. So we had to rebuild the whole set, of course, like the stones, and have the fluid there. And the fluid should gather in the middle and then slowly build kind of, you know, connecting tentacles going upwards, and finally build the black matter. So this was quite a heavy FX task, and just like a lot of look development flowed into that. It's like how to come from this liquid state to these kind of tentacle feelings, but still keeping, you know, this oily texture that then evolves into the black matter. And at some point, this was kind of a one-shot thing. Later on, the director decided to just make 2 shots out of it. That would have been way more easier for us. But anyway, this is because we have like one simulation for everything. But, you know, at least it works out. So they were quite flexible if they wanted to change their mind again. And so we ended up having, the liquid black matter in the barrels that's forming the raw black matter at the end.
So another big element that was already established in season 1 was the portal. This time it was a little more sophisticated, because there's this really emotional moment at the end of episode 8 where Charlotte meets her daughter Elizabeth in the future through the portal. And both of the scenes play inside the nuclear power plant basin that we've already seen earlier. So this is the 2019, the present version, and this is the 2053 version of it. And what was challenging on set was basically we had to, so these 2 sets were built, they were like two weeks in between. So they built this set, and then the art department destroyed the set. So we had to triangulate the camera position exactly, as well as the angle and everything, to match the exact camera inside the new set 2 weeks later. We actually, like, it was really hard to find the markers as well under all this rubble. but it worked out somehow. So by using this, we created shots like this one here, where you can basically see the portal and then the exact same spot in the future. And here you can see a little better. This is basically top left is the plate in 2019. Top right is the exact same camera for the plate in 2053. In the mid left, those are combined, and you can see how the edge of the basin aligns with each other. And then you have the portal elements, and this time it was basically, for us it was important to create a more spatial feeling, so that's why we've been utilizing these particles, which had a certain movement, and we basically tried to build a bridge in between those two worlds with this particle movement, and not to have a two-dimensional picture-in-picture look, basically.
Yes, and one of the biggest shots of the show, of course, is the end where you have the black dome swallowing the whole nuclear power plant and destroying Winden. And this one is called Akira shot. Bo is a really, really huge fan of the Akira anime, manga. And he's like, okay, I really want to have kind of this effect in my show. So for all of you who don't know the anime, we just like provided a short video. Yeah, the briefing was quite clear. So it's like, okay, we want to have this, but, you know, in real. So in the end, our shot it's unfortunately cut in the final episode, but we came out to build the black dome over the nuclear power plant destroying Winden. And it's a massive scale. So like the black dome is somewhat like 4 kilometers wide. So we kind of had to evaluate. So it should not look like a miniature shot. So like scaling was really important. And we had to basically rebuild parts of the forest as well to just have this FX simulation of all the trees that got destroyed, because you have debris flying around, you have trees flying around, because you really want to feel the massive scale and the massive impact you have when the black dome hits Winden. And this is just an example of kind of some of the most important layers that go into it. And this is just like trying to combine this, and also like to combine this with the plate, and also, you know, on this tight schedule. And following up this shot, there's actually one, also really important shot that's coming at the end of the season.
So Bo liked the Akira shot a lot. So 4 weeks before our deadline, he came up with this idea that we need another similar shot that gets us closer into the action. I agree that it was necessary, and it's like a super cool shot. But yeah, so we had 4 weeks from start to finish, and we basically had to create a shot where a house gets swallowed by the black dome, and the environment definitely needed to react. So this is what we came up with. So the plate that we got provided was, the purpose of the plate was originally not this shot, so it was just something that they had shot. So they gave us this, and then we actually had to recreate the whole environment in 3D to get all the leaves moving and so on. So we took a trip to that house again and captured all the relevant data, as well as the LiDAR scan as always. And that was actually, again, really helpful in order to recreate exact 3D models using photogrammetry as well of all the surrounding trees that we could then use to scatter leaves around them. And simulate them. So we ended up having all these layers. Basically, so what you see here is the plate, and then we have the black dome. So we basically reused our Akira shot element. We had to modify it quite a bit because it's a completely different scale again. But it actually worked out quite well. And then in the middle, you basically see all the plants that we created. And on top of that, we to get this destruction told a little better, we also created additional elements like a tree and a bike that get blown away, and then obviously we of course we added the dust layer as well.
Yes, so, well, next to the big shot, one of the bigger elements in the show was the apparatus, which we already know from season 1. But this time also, at the end, Martha is showing up with kind of a modified version of it. So she has kind of this portable apparatus. So it was quite clear that you should see it and just get, okay, this is like a thing where you can go time travel. So you have kind of the same material as a big suitcase apparatus, and you have similar cylinders that would move out of it. So it's just like the future version of it. The other thing is this thing is new, so it's like it's used quite heavily. So you have a lot of like fingerprints on it, scratches, it's worn out, and we just rebuilt the prop. So the art department had a prop on set as a reference, which was great, because Martha is also using this thing, which, as you can see, the prop is looks a bit like plastic, and no one really wants to see that in the final movie. So we put our apparatus in, and for these kind of shots, well, you need to have rotation of the hands, you need to have like a perfect tracking. So we were able to put in all the reflections and shadowing of the hands, and also to have light interaction, since, well, you know, there's light coming out of the mini apparatus to realize the time travel effect. And since we ran a bit out of time, we just go quickly through the other VFX elements we were working on as well, just quite quickly.
Right, so one additional element that we were working on was the nuclear power plant that you can see here. We've already done that one for season 1 as well. The special thing this season was that we also had to create a destroyed version of it, which is this one here. We basically used the 3D model that we already built for the present nuclear power plant and projected a matte painting on the geometry. And then the other thing that we had to do was basically creating this whole destroyed environment that is based on the Akira shot. So you can basically see this circular destruction around the power plant, and then obviously the wall that is built around the power plant to keep people from getting in there.
Talking about the wall, there were several shots where we needed to extend the wall piece they built, because they also had the apartment put much effort into that building, and it's like I really want to keep the look, this worn out wall piece. So we had scenes like this, for example, where they're walking towards the wall, but of course the wall piece is super small, so they shot it in front of green screen. We had like the set piece as a reference, and then had to extend it for, we had quite a few shots where you had to have like a proper wall. And as always, in edit, they just decided, well, Jonas should just like walk by himself towards the wall, and you know, this kind of play, it does look really easy, but like the girl is touching the fence, so you have to stabilize the shit out of it. We didn't have any clean plates, so it's actually one of the bigger shots that were kind of pain in the ass to, you know, no one will see it ever, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, so in this season we also had this particle element that that's purpose is basically to guide Katerina through the cave to the Sigmundus gate. Here we basically had 2 different particle types. So the ones that you can see here are following the topology of the wall. Another case where the LiDAR scan came in handy. And then we have these particles here, which are free floating, and they have this kind of this light helix movement, which Bo wanted us to implement to get like a little more magical and mysterious feeling.
Yes, and also one of the other more invisible effects is the church, because we see it in the present, and we already saw that in season 1. But in season 2, we just go back 100 years. And so we had to rebuild the CG model, and we had to rebuild the church. That also meant like this is like an old Scandinavian church, and we looked up like how is this church built, because you really see the framework, the underlying framework. And so we wanted to have like an architecturally and structurally correct model of it. And since we built all this church in CG, we also thought, well, why not destroy it as well for the future? So we did a big simulation on that because it looks way more real and it's, easier to achieve, basically. And then in the future, the other parts were as well, we have kind of a wasteland, so we have to get rid of the trees and we had to extend the graveyard as well.
And last but not least, we have this shot of a person getting killed with a pickaxe by Noah, young Noah. So this one was really funny. It was actually the first day of shooting, and we used a little more traditional technique. So the director, Bo, wanted it to be super brutal. And one technique that is commonly used is basically just to use an artificial end piece or blade, basically. But that would mean that the actor would have to slow down or stop, and the goal was basically to create this brutal effect while making sure that nobody gets hurt. So in collaboration with the SFX department, we built these boxes, which were like a styrofoam material, and we placed it in the exact location where we would place the actor in the other shot. So the actor of Noah could basically swing his pickaxe without any constraints and just go, full in. And then basically using optical alignment on set, we basically just created an overlay and placed the actor in the exact same spot, and it turned out really well, I think.
Well, yeah, I hope you're really curious about Dark Season 2 if you haven't already watched it, and I hope we didn't spoil you too much. But yeah, go ahead, watch it. Like, we're super stoked to work on it, and it's a really nice story. It's really great characters, and thank you very much for listening to us.
So much, guys. Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Fales, by the way. I'm a visual effects journalist and the editor of beforesandafters.com. A bit later on, we're going to have some Q&A sessions for the 2 visual effects presentations this morning. But before we do any of that, I'm going to introduce the next speaker, who can pop up and start setting up. I think he's got to do his laptop. What we're going to hear about now is about a Chinese film called The Wandering Earth, which has a lot of visual effects in it. A bunch of different studios worked on it. One of those was PIXOMONDO, which is where Samir Ansari worked at the time while he worked on that film. After his talk, we're going to head back up on stage for a quick Q&A. And just to let you know about what else is coming up, when we've done that Q&A, there'll be a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back with a discussion about CG actors in films with 3 presenters and also a small Q&A afterwards. But anyway, I'm going to introduce Samir, and thank you so much.
So first I'd like to thank the NIFFF for having me here today. I've seen some really, really great talks, like the one from Nicolas and Julia just before me. So I'm honoured to be here to share my contribution to the festival. So I'm here to talk about the VFX work for The Wandering Earth, which I was the overall VFX supervisor for PIXOMONDO, and it was by far the most complex work we'd ever done in China, let alone Asia. And it's basically China's first venture into large-scale Hollywood-style blockbuster sci-fi. So it's obviously comes with many, many, many different challenges. So today I'm going to try and talk about just some of the thousands of challenges that come with that. It was very tough because there wasn't much to. I mean, obviously in the West we're quite used to watching these sci-fis in the movies, but with those also come huge budgets. So we didn't have anything to. Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, we didn't have a lot as a reference to say that we can create this kind of work with this sort of budget. Hey. I was getting worried because there's two screens here. I was going to ask all you guys to come on this side and watch it here, but that's all right. Okay. So, yes, again, hi. Overall, a quick overview of the types of work we had to do for the project, and also about the story. So it's based on a Hugo Award-winning book by Qixin Liu, and it's about a future where the sun is in the process of dying out and becoming a red giant, and is kind of set to engulf the entire solar system unless we do something about it. So a decision is made to create huge sort of ion propulsion engines, like you can kind of see it there, looks like a mountain, and that would be used to propel the Earth towards the next habitable star, while humankind live in sort of underground bunkers, basically like cities. And then, obviously, spoiler alert, things don't quite go to plan, and we have the movie as it is. So it's a $48 million budget, which it's definitely quite high within the Asian market, but for Hollywood sci-fis, it's considered a relatively low to mid-level budget. But even though it does sound like a lot, you have to consider that the visual effects budget of that was a fraction of that. It was nowhere near 48 million. And of course, it was tough working in that budget and still producing something that people would actually want to watch. Yeah, but in the end, it turned out to be quite successful. It made $700 million in the box office globally before being bought by Netflix. So it's out on Netflix now. So that was great. So for anyone who hasn't heard of the project or seen anything from it, I'd just like to play the trailer for you so we can put this all in context.
太阳急速老化，将会不断膨胀，吞没整个地球。由于气候的剧烈变化，人类将离开地表，永远移居地下城。
The question remains, now what should we do?
All countries and regions around the world will mobilize all resources to construct 10,000
建造1万座行星发电机。
无论最终结果将人类历史导向何处，我们选择希望。
结果。
Thank you. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of there's an immense scale to this film, and we were in charge of handling a lot of the frozen environments, which contained a lot of quite complex destruction sequences. With that, we had falling buildings, we had collapsing ice, we had falling buildings inside collapsing ice, and kind of every kind of combination in between. So I was globally responsible for 5 visual effects teams that covered a wide range of shots across the story, obviously many of which were full CG. 80% was done fully in China. I had 3 visual effects teams in Beijing, where I was based, 1 visual effects studio in Germany, in Stuttgart, and 1 in Bulgaria, a small team in Bulgaria. But today I'm just going to be covering the work that we did at PIXOMONDO Beijing and PIXOMONDO Stuttgart. So first, and it was also over a year of production in total, just for the post-production. Today I'm going to be talking mostly just about the post-visual effects rather than the on-set. So a bit about my background. I've been fortunate enough to work with directors just Steven Spielberg, Andrew Stanton, James Gunn, Ridley Scott, on projects such as these. So this is all kind of relevant experience, I think, for the sci-fi genre. I definitely learned quite a lot about handling really complex sequences within sci-fi and that medium. But around 2012, when I was finishing my work on Prometheus, I was offered an opportunity to go and work in China on a Chinese a Chinese fantasy movie, which is The Assassins over there. So I took it. I took the opportunity and moved to China, not having ever been to China before, not speaking the language. But as soon as I arrived, I fell in love with the country. I loved its culture, obviously its food. And then I ended up, for the next 7 years, kind of working between Beijing and London, kind of bouncing around the globe. And over those 7 years, I worked on those films there. The middle one actually being a sci-fi that was released in 2015. It wasn't aimed as a global kind of blockbuster as The Wandering Earth was, but it still had relative success. And so, I mean, 7 years ago, about 2011, when I first moved, things were quite different in Asia for the visual effects. I mean, 7 years is really not a long time, but the kind of work we were getting awarded and our relationships with Western studios were nowhere near as strong as they are today. And again, just 7 short years later, I'm here to talk to you all in Switzerland about a film we did in China. So things definitely moved on. Okay, so now going back to the visual effects of the movie. The first step, I guess, was working with my art director and speaking directly to the director Guo Fan for the movie, and define a visual language for how he wanted us to tell his story and what sort of style we would use for that. It is still a Chinese movie, so although it does kind of have a Hollywood style to it, there were a lot of Chinese art fundamentals that we incorporated, like Chinese oil paintings of mountains, and we tried to incorporate all of that. And also the director had a background in fine art, so he had a very specific style that he wanted us to follow. So during the shot design phase, we had a few goals. Obviously, telling the director's story was the paramount focus. Based on the script, we knew that there were going to be enormous environments. We also knew that all those environments would have to collapse, and then because of that, a lot of things could be in play. It may be hard to focus your eye on the right things, so we had to make sure that you could focus your eye in the right places. And then lastly, being mindful of the budget, because again, if I were to ask the director, how would you like it to look? Of course, he wants it to look like movies like 2012, Interstellar, but those are $200 million movies, and we didn't have that, so we had to work out a smart way of giving a similar feeling with the budget that we had available. So next, we started looking at reference of ice and sort of wide landscapes, also service vehicles, because all of these things would feature later in the movie. Then there's lots of different types of ice, as you can tell. It depends on how the ice is formed, how old it is. So we tried to make a select and pick the type of ice that the director wanted us to use. So then we moved on to the concept stage. And this is one concept of Shanghai frozen inside a huge wall of ice. This was one of the first concepts we worked on, and ended up being one of the last shots we did. It went for like the whole year, because there were a few specific challenges in this one. To tell the story, the director really wanted to see into the ice. He wanted to see transparency. You needed to recognize it as Shanghai. But the problem is, ice isn't really that transparent, especially on that scale. And it's nowhere near as transparent enough to tell the story. So we tried to find a balance of realism and storytelling. And that process kind of went ahead throughout the whole film, with every shot we had with ice in it. This is a slightly closer shot that our art department put together. And then we started looking at the sort of wide vistas with collapsing ice and collapsing skyscrapers, and kind of how that would all play together. Again, it's a snowy environment. We had to dial the snow back. If you look at real Arctic environments, you probably wouldn't see any of this. It would all just be fog. So we had to try and find a balance where you can still get some shot clarity, and also angle the lighting in certain ways so that you can simplify certain shapes, like the buildings in the background. You know, we want to focus the detail where it should be. Also, we wanted to add a lot of history to the ground, to the plateaus. We've got a lot of small detail, chasms, cracks, all kinds of texture. Also, the director was quite keen on having different levels of ground, as if there's been sort of tectonic history to the environment. He didn't like the flat, barren look of usual Arctic photography. And then here's another one. This was a concept we painted up of one of the engines. Again, it's a huge scale environment. And also the perspective was another thing that we worked with the director on. He's quite a fan of extreme vanishing points and very low cameras. So we started to put those ideas into our concepts. And another one here where we're trying to keep the eye in the right area and focus on the right things. So another thing we worked on was kind of moving concepts. So painting concept over multiple frames in the shot design stage so that you can have a good idea of what the final shot might look like. And this was not just helpful for the director, but also helpful for my other artists further down in the visual effects process, because then they can understand the intention of what the shot was about. Here's a couple of examples. We've painted the concept at the top and then the final shot at the bottom. And another. And of course, shots change over the process. You know, these were created a year apart, but we still tried to keep true to the original idea of the concept. And here's another one. So the next step was trying to take these 2D images and try and build a sort of 3D world from all of that. And personally, this is actually one of my favorite areas of the visual effects process, because it allows you to work quite quickly with direct feedback from the director, using very simple shapes just to get the idea of what the shot is about with cameras and getting the speeds right and things like that. So here's an example. We started quite simple models, no major animation. We even used cubes just to get parallax and depth cueing. Again, quite simple shapes, and on the little insert there you can see the CG, what the CG camera was doing using the plate photography. So again, it's all quite simple. It's just very easy to block things out very quickly. And obviously our main focus is always do the iterations when the work is cheap. You know, you want to do as much as you can in the foundation. These are just some sketches from talks I had with the director, where he wanted to flesh out different ideas. He could sketch something and we can just throw it into 3D, slowly try and kind of fit that into what his vision was. And then on top of that, we did a drone shoot of Shanghai to get real locations of all the buildings. So that was really important, because it allowed us to align our cameras within a physical space, because on a film like this, there's so much going on, the environments are so huge, it's very easy to get lost and spiral out of sync. So we always had a ground truth reference of where everything was, and it's also important for obviously the lighting and the effects to be consistent if everything is in the same location. From the blocking stage, it's useful for me to see what's happening in the shot, but it's not always helpful for the director. This was the director's first visual effects movie, so it was my job to kind of guide him through the process, because sometimes if you're looking at these images, you don't necessarily know exactly what you're looking at. You don't know what you can comment on and what you can't. So I started to put together some slightly more elaborate representations of what the final shot would look like, now using LiDAR scans, higher resolution geometry, some fog effects, some lighting effects. So yeah, just to give them a much better estimation of what's actually going to happen in the shot. And again, you can see that some things, they change over the process, but it was really helpful for the same reasons as painting concept, for my team to have vision on what we were doing, and also for the client to understand what was going to happen. Here's an example of a post viz at the top and the final shot. And here's another. So you can see it's actually, aside from the tiny details, there's not a huge amount of difference in terms of geometry between the top and the bottom images there. We basically had to rebuild our entire pipeline, our entire scene management pipeline at PIXOMONDO just for this show. So I worked closely with our two pipeline leads, Long Hao and Arlon, and the three of us designed a brand new pipeline that would allow us to pull in lots of different geometry and also have it controllable so that you can easily make changes without it going through lots of different departments and having a very slow turnaround time. It's kind of based on it's a custom based on universal scene description style workflow, and it really saved us massively later down the line. So another key factor, obviously, with these environments is we had to build a lot of assets, a lot of different models of, in fact, it was 180, it was more than 180 in fact, if you add everything together of different models. It kind of spanned vehicles, we made digital doubles and general environment work, kind of environmental features, buildings, things like that. Also, we had to share these assets out with other studios that were working on the movie, which was challenging because we were also receiving requests from other studios for shots that we didn't even have in our own shot count. So, you may see a close-up of a truck in one shot in another vendor's work, and we would have a collaboration with them and try and fit it into our schedule to make those changes for them, even though we didn't actually benefit from it. So I'll start with the trucks because these are quite important to the story. So we built 3 different types of truck, a military truck, engineering truck, and a cargo truck. These are important for the story because there are large portions in the film where the actors are confined to the insides of the truck because the treacherous conditions in the atmosphere, they can't breathe the air anymore. So it's almost like the vehicles kind of become an extension of the characters in a way. And it kind of brings the audience a bit more into the story. The general design, I'm quite a fan of gauges and pipes and things like that, so I try to have a function to everything we make. This is a kind of an early concept showing the scale of the trucks. So those kind of pipes and gauges and switches, even if they're not plugged into anything, they're quite important to sell the scale and function of everything. Further to that, if we have like for example, a ladder, if we're adding a ladder, we try to think about the mechanics behind it as well. We don't just throw it in there. Next, we have this kind of weird thing. It's kind of like a Zorb, a big protective shell that's used at various points throughout the story. You can probably see it there a little bit. The art department made this out of paper because it has a collapsing mechanism, which is, again, vital to the story. It needs to go from a bubble that's about 5 meters tall, and it needs to be able to shrink into a tiny handheld grenade-like canister. So we had to think about the folding mechanism as well as the umbrella kind of spires and how that would all work together. And then we have this one. It's personally my favorite asset that we made, this little surveillance drone. It's pretty cute. My hope for this when we were designing it was to make it quite inquisitive. We have a lot of very subtle animation on things like the rudders and the propellers, just to give it that inquisitive nature. Again, it's part of an extension of characters because there's so much environment work in this that sometimes you lose connection to human sort of element. And as you can see, concept-wise, we didn't change much from our original design except for the color of the strips of the paintwork. Because we were within a frozen city environment, we of course had to make all the major landmarks of Shanghai. So this one was really challenging because that's a real photo of the real buildings, and they kind of look quite surreal anyway. And I would have review sessions where I'm looking at the model and I would look at a connection of a joint and I'd be like, yeah, that looks a little bit strange. And then I'd look at the reference again, and I'd be like, okay, you know what? No, it's fine. That's probably how it should be. Ignore me. So that was quite challenging. But aside from those hero buildings, we also had a lot of cases where we needed just buildings really far in the distance that had a kind of undisclosed amount of damage on them. So we actually took to a procedural approach for those. So our effects artist, Ricardo, made a Houdini setup that was literally, you know, he could click a button and output as many buildings as you want randomly with different sizes, different shapes. We also have 3 different types of building there. We have a concrete, a fully glass, and then a hybrid. So I could just ask him, can we have 15 hybrid buildings? And he could pass that straight to the layout team, and they can scatter them into the shots. Also, the shading was fully procedural. Again, this was designed to be seen really far from camera. These weren't hero assets, so that was a good way for us to save time on building. We also used this on some of our hero buildings for things like smashing the glass and covering the buildings in snow using different vectors on the model and different point data. So there's an example in the final shot of how that looks. Again, saving a lot of time for modeling because they had more important things to do, like the ice canyon. So this is kind of where most of our work was centered, and it happens to be enormous. Before we started the process of modeling this, I went back to looking at references like I did at the concept stage, but looking a lot closer at actual physical, realistic details. So on analyzing the pictures, yeah, they look slightly different, but they do share common traits, such as you can see that there's different levels of frequencies of detail. You have some areas which have lots of tiny little details, and then other areas which are like this, where nothing really that interesting happens for about 20 meters. So it's about finding those scales of detail and working together with them. And then this is just a shot while we were working on the model. This wasn't finished at the time, so the modeling team had a lot of work to do on this. So the height of the wall was actually almost 0.5 kilometer high. So these are enormous environments. We had a lot of extremely wide shots, so that was a challenge, not just for building the model, but also rendering it. We had a lot in frame at any one time. And this was another thing that during the process, sometimes you don't realize how much work you've done. So when we finished the project and you kind of work with the marketing team and you work out all the cool statistics about the film and all the cool stuff you added, I was checking the size of this, and we actually modeled almost 50 kilometers of space. Yeah, normally in marketing you'd find some other weird kind of abstract way of saying it, but 45 kilometers. So our modeling team did an amazing job on that, and we didn't have many modelers because of the budget. The other brief was that it needed to be manageable, because I knew for a fact from my experience on previous sci-fi movies, the director's going to want to change things. He's going to want to move things around, and we're not helping anyone to make a huge solid block of ice that you can't modify. So that was one of the key points that I made sure our asset team was aware of. Also, we needed to consider that this was all going to be destroyed. So you can't always just make a model and then it's fine. You need to prepare the model for destruction. It needs to kind of be Houdini friendly. You need to be careful of things like intersections. You need to be careful of how the topology is flowing. So the asset team worked very closely with the effects team. Here's a little breakdown of a deconstruction of that environment. So there we have the city, which is modeled on real data, and then went for a modular approach for the small chunks. So that allowed us to move things around in the layout stage. And here's a fun little fly through. So all of this was sculpted. When making the original asset build, I did a survey of the entire length of the trench and plotted out all of our cameras, so we knew where to focus more of our detail. Because we couldn't, within the time we had in the budget, we couldn't model everything to the same high quality standard, let alone render it. So we had to put more detail in some areas, slightly less in others that weren't seen by camera. And then here's a wide showing as I mean the top is the model. That's the base model, so you can see that the rift is actually a lot more narrow. And yeah, that didn't work in the final shot. We wanted to open that up. So with this approach, we were able to move things around without too much hassle. So another huge factor of the challenges of the film was effect simulations, obviously destruction, volumetrics. So we had edge-to-edge full-frame destruction in a lot of our shots. And it was extremely heavy to simulate all of that. We had some shots where we had to break our simulations into clusters. We had almost 100 clusters of different simulations. They could take about a week to simulate on really powerful computers. So you can imagine if you get your footage back and it doesn't look like you expected, it can be quite a deflating experience after waiting so long to see the simulation. Also, there's a lot of different material properties we had to consider. We have glass, we have concrete, metals, ice. All of that needs to simulate in slightly different ways and interact with each other in a physically correct space. But further from that, it also needs to be art directable. Again, we keep to physics for the first few versions, but then, you know, as a creative process takes over, you need to be able to control this stuff, especially on large-scale environments like this. So here's just a little, I just did a punch in a crop on one area of destruction. So top left is kind of the puppet of showing the geometry where it's collapsing. And so you can see there's quite a lot of small simulation detail in there. And then the bottom left is kind of another angle from a different shot. To try and alleviate the risk of waiting so long for these simulations to see how the final shot would be played out, I used the post-fizz team again for, you know, it doesn't look like you can tell much there, but you can actually tell a lot about the framing, the speed of everything. So we would define that with the director wherever possible. Obviously, it's not always easy to tell what the final shot's going to look like with effects. So then we passed that to our effects artist, Yinghao, who went to town on it and broke that all down. So I've removed the smoke on the inside of the barrel there just so you can see the tinier pieces. And then that kind of all went into the final shot, which is the collapse of the Shanghai Tower. Further to this, we also had trucks driving through the canyon with everything collapsing on them. We needed to art direct exactly where the chunks were falling. There we have a piece that actually hits the foreground truck there. So we needed to control that. And again, it was quite heavy simulations on that. And here's another example, falling debris. Another example where we had to art direct the chunks because they had to collide with the glass, and wherever it collided with the glass, you would then get a crack in the right place with the right sort of velocity attached to it. And lastly, we have a shot like this, where on the surface it doesn't look like that much is going on, but if I zoom into just the central section a bit more, it's a little bit dark, but you can see there's a lot of subtle detail there. There's a landslide on top of the mountain. There's the Great Wall of China, which is actually collapsing. We have falling boulders. We have a lot of small things going on that just kind of help to enrich the frame. And also, again, we were a bit hesitant in working on shots like this because we were quite sure that the censorship board wouldn't allow these shots to happen. I mean, I've seen movies be canned for much smaller things than this, but we were destroying major Chinese landmarks. And I think that kind of shows a maturity in the Asian film market, that they're now definitely loosening their grip on things like this. Because I think 5 years ago this wouldn't happen. We wouldn't be able to do this, I think. So just some final words. I'm sorry, I've run out of time. But in spite of all the challenges on the show, I was generally quite happy with what we managed to achieve. Of course, there's always things that you would like to improve. You know, for every one thing that we did, there's probably 3 things I wanted to do. But ultimately, you kind of, within this budget, you kind of have to pick your battles and focus on what you feel is important. For me, that was story, core cinematography, and general shot clarity. And about visual effects in China, so it's still quite early days for large-scale visual effects in China. And basically that just means you wouldn't have the same kind of artist base, I guess, as you would in the West, because, you know, in the West you may find artists and companies that have been around for 15, 20, 25 years. In China you don't have that as much. You know, the most you'll have is maybe you'll find someone with about 7 or 8 years experience. But that wasn't always a bad thing. There was a genuine kind of sincere drive by the artists for what they lacked in experience. They were very passionate about the work, and of course these kinds of films are very popular in China. Interstellar, Gravity were massive films in China, so there was a great sense of pride for my Chinese artists working on the film, and a sense of responsibility that they felt that this is their own product now and they can explore this genre themselves. So I think it's quite an exciting time for Asian cinema. After this film has actually done so well in the box office, it hopefully would lead to more films like this, not just coming from China, but just from all over the globe, because it kind of shows that these films can make a big success in the box office, and, you know, still maintain a certain level of quality behind that. So hopefully when other countries also follow the same model, we should hopefully see some more cultural stories intertwined with the sci-fi genre, hopefully making more interesting stories and pushing us all to be better artists. So yeah, thank you all for your time.
We've got about 15 minutes, I think, for questions, and I thought I'd actually throw it out to you guys straight away, because hopefully from those great presentations you've got a few things you wanted to ask. Has anyone got a question straight up? Sam, wait for the microphone.
Hi, thanks to everybody. Just a few stats for nerds. Could you please tell how many people you had on each show globally?
I have to think about it. Like, we were quite a small team, so we had, I think, in total, like 5 CG artists. If I'm not totally wrong, we have like 3 FX artists, 1 the supervisor, obviously, and we were a team of about 12 compers, and plus production, coordination, VFX comp soup, and 1 complete. And yeah, CG soup, CG lead, and then.
So I think more or less about 30 people, maybe, something like that.
And on The Wandering Earth, it's a bit more complicated, because again, I had 5 studios, and all of them had their own other shows running in parallel. So the numbers of artists would fluctuate throughout the project. So, you know, at the beginning you may have all your artists, and then by the end or in the middle it would dip slightly. But at least in Beijing, we had actually for most of the project only about 5 compositors. We went up to about 12, 15 towards the end at crunch time, but we had to be careful of the numbers. That was how we kind of fit everything into budget. We kind of had less artists working for longer, which, you know, it was kind of necessary for the creative process to let things develop. And then our effects team was, again, quite small. We had about 4 artists for most of the project, and then the maximum we had was 5 by the end. So it's not huge teams.
Wow, awesome. Any other questions? Come on. Right, just here. Just wait for the microphone, if that's okay.
My question is for Nicolas and Julia. I was wondering, just out of curiosity, if the actors in Dark had any special effects on their faces, because every actor from the past to the present to the future really, really looks alike.
That was actually just a really, really great job by the casting agency. Yeah. So for every actor, they have different ages, basically, and there was one actor, Adam, that we haven't seen in the making of, that had a pretty intense makeup job on his face, but even that was no VFX at all. Yeah.
Great question. Right, anyone else got something burning they want to ask? Oh, yeah.
I do have one. You told, Samir, you told us that you made a 50 kilometers model. So is there any possibility to like make a video game out of it?
Yeah. To be honest, I felt like the whole process was a video game, VR, because it was so it was so surreal working on a scale like that. But yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a theme park ride or something with a little fly through of that. Yeah.
That's cool. I have a question for Nicolas and Julia. Did you mention that Akira shot, the final explosion, was cut from the show? Is that what you said?
No, it's not cut. It's just like intersected, basically. So we had like one shot, and the original planning, or like in the original edit, you just see the building up of the dome. Then you have a cut, go somewhere else, and then you just see the expanding dome. And we were just like, shit, what should we put so much work into this whole ground interaction thing? And it's like, this was a lot of work. And I mean, understanding from the first previous, probably the director felt like, okay, this is quite a hard task, and just to make sure if it's working or not. And I mean, finally, they just put in at least like the dome is coming down to the ground, and we just see it in the series. So they actually shortened the shot at the end. But yeah, we were just like afraid that like this whole like this main work that looked so awesome at the end was like cut out of the.
Because I was like, oh, the whole thing's not in there?
No, sorry, that was just like.
Yeah, so actually for the director Bo, this whole Akira thing was a really important thing, since he grew up with Akira. It's one of his favorite movies, and it was really funny when we were inside the destroyed basin. That's also based on a set from Akira, and the art department basically built an Akira set for him. So he was standing in there, and on the day we were shooting, it was like super emotional for him, and he thanked everyone, and it was like a child's dream come true.
Wow. I mean, they're making a new Akira film, right? Is that Taika Waititi's the director of this? Oh, really? Yeah, cool. I think.
That's interesting, though.
Right. Another question. Up the back here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for those presentations that I found really, really interesting. And I had a question especially for Nicolas Loy, and maybe you also, Mr. Ansari. How far, I was wondering how far the models you're using for your special effects are nature-based or nature-inspired. You spoke about the sun, and you spoke about this electromagnetic fluid that inspired you. How far do you have physicians, mathematicians to develop the models, or how far do you take it over from other developing studios? How far are you research oriented? How far are you taking it up from others with working together with other businesses? Thank you.
Yeah, similar to what Samir said earlier. So basically, you start off the process by using real references from nature, basically, and then you have to make sure to make it art directable as a second step. So we do not have actual mathematicians or physicians, but obviously our FX artists basically deal with mathematics and physics all day long, and they try to recreate all these simulations, and we are always trying to match the nature as close as possible, basically. As for example, I mean, the black matter obviously is a special thing because there is no such a thing as a black matter, and one of the challenging things in this process was that the briefing that we got from the director was really vague. I mean, it was an idea that he had about how it's supposed to move, but he was also, so we basically created it together and did some fine tuning on the speed, etc.
Yeah, I mean, same applies with us. I guess more specifically, the most scientific-based element, I think, was the snow itself. I didn't have time to talk about it, but the velocities and the way that snow reacts, we spent a lot of time looking at scientific data on that kind of stuff. You know, obviously rain falls at like 9 meters per second, and snow has a similar kind of base in science for that. So I think it was like 2.2 meters or something per second. And I did a lot of, I felt pretty bad for the artists that we had, because I was always giving him constant feedback. He kind of became known as the snowman. Everything he did, it was just 9 versions of snow a day until we got the right feeling of the snow, because it's pretty hard to get it right. But that was, aside from what Nicolas said, with the effects artist using real physics. But you know, a lot of that goes out of the window when the director or the client wants to give a creative note. Then it's kind of like, yeah, okay. Just, you have to work within a visual realism, but not as much scientific realism.
What is also always really helpful, just to go back on that LiDAR scan, for example, since you are using the real scale for all the simulations that you're doing. So even like not only for simulations, but always also for size relationships in shots, for example, you can always base your first version on reality. You can say, you know, this building is 3 kilometers away, it has this and that size, so it's supposed, through this lens, it's supposed to have this exact look. And then the director can still say, you know, make it bigger, I don't care, but it's cool to have a starting point.
Great question. I reckon we've got time for one more, just up the back there.
Hi. I think it's for Samir, but if you guys are also using Houdini, then you feel free to answer. But I was wondering how long you've been using Houdini, and if it's quite recent, how it's changed your workflow, and what's improved and what's changed, and how you had to, like, you know, change how people work with the tool.
Yeah, sure. So the Beijing office, at least, has been in Houdini for, I think generally for about 2 years as their main effects tool. Before that, you know, there were obviously a lot of plugins, a lot of thinking particles was used. Other PIXOMONDO facilities are phasing that stuff out now, so we're trying to move towards a more Houdini-based system. I guess the way it's really benefited us, outside of the obvious effects, is the node-based way of working. So we actually, at one point, you know, started looking into using Houdini as a lighting package as well. I mean, we rendered a lot of our effects in Houdini, along with the lighters using Maya, just because it was a lot easier to control. You know, you have a lot of your vector data already baked into the simulation, so why throw it away? And that logic was more important for the studio, because then people started thinking in that kind of way, and then later that will hopefully spawn new advancements for the rest of the pipeline, especially procedural dependency graph. I think that's a new thing in Houdini that I think is going to change a lot of how visual effects pipelines work, personally.
Because Rise uses Houdini in quite a big way, doesn't it, already?
Yeah, actually Rise is a completely Houdini-based studio. Basically, we use Houdini for everything except for animation. So we are using Mantra for render, and doing a lot of procedural stuff, obviously, and yeah. So we've been using Houdini for 10 years now, I think.
Brilliant. Okay. I think we might have to wrap it up there, but we are coming back in 15 minutes for the CG Humans talk. Can you guys please thank these three for excellent discussion?